The Battle of Gettysburg, fought from July 1st to July 3rd, 1863, was not just a turning point in the American Civil War, it was a pivotal moment in history. A clash of titans, it was a battle for the soul of a nation, a contest between two worldviews that would shape the future of the United States. Picture it, a rolling, dusty landscape in southern Pennsylvania, where the thunder of cannons shook the earth and the cries of soldiers echoed through the hills. This was not just any battlefield. Gettysburg would be etched in the minds of millions. The Union and Confederate armies faced off with unmatched intensity, each side knowing that the outcome could mean life or death for their cause. The summer of 1863 found the Confederacy under the command of General Robert E. Lee, who had already achieved several significant victories in the Eastern Theater. Lee, whose military brilliance had earned him the respect of his men and his enemies, believed the time had come to strike a decisive blow in the North. If he could win a great victory on Union soil, it might demoralize the North, perhaps even convince foreign powers like Great Britain and France to recognize the Confederacy's independence. On the other side, General George G. Meade led the Union Army of the Potomac. Meade had only recently taken command, stepping in for Joseph Hooker after Hooker's disastrous performance at the Battle of Chancellorsville. Meade, a solid, reliable officer, was not as famous as Lee, but he was determined to defend the Union at all costs. For weeks, Lee's army had been marching through the Shenandoah Valley, and then into Maryland, and finally into Pennsylvania. The Confederacy was on the move, and northern soil was suddenly under threat. But Lee had a dilemma. While he was confident in his army's ability to win another victory, his supply lines were stretched thin. The further he advanced, the more vulnerable his troops became. The Union Army, meanwhile, was marching to intercept Lee. Meade was eager to confront the Confederate forces, but also cautious, not wanting to be drawn into a battle without favorable conditions. Yet, the pressure was mounting from Washington. President Abraham Lincoln needed a victory to keep morale high. Failure, particularly in the North, would do terrible damage to the Union cause. On July 1st, 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg erupted almost by accident. Confederate forces, scouting ahead of the main army, clashed with Union cavalry and infantry near the small town of Gettysburg. The initial skirmishes were small, but soon both sides realized the importance of the location. The town sat on key roads that led in all directions, making it strategically valuable. It would not do for either side to let the other take control. By the end of the first day, the Confederacy had pushed the Union forces back, but not without significant losses. Lee, confident of a quick victory, ordered his troops to press forward. His strategy, however, relied heavily on bold, decisive action. The Union troops, though pushed back, had taken strong defensive positions on Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill, which gave them an advantage for the following days. The second day of the battle would be marked by ferocious fighting, with both armies seeking to break each other's lines. Lee's plan was to attack the Union flanks, hoping to turn the tide in his favor. On the Union side, Meade had fortified his positions on the high ground, but this would not be enough to dissuade Lee from his audacious plans. One of the most famous aspects of this day was the Confederate assault on Little Round Top, a small hill that overlooked the Union lines. If the Confederates could take Little Round Top, they would have a commanding position over the entire battlefield. But here, the Union soldiers stood firm. Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, leading the 20th Maine, was tasked with holding the hill at all costs. The Confederate forces, under the command of General John Bell Hood, attacked relentlessly, trying to overwhelm the Union defenders. The battle was fierce, with the Union forces running low on ammunition and ready to retreat. In a moment of sheer courage and ingenuity, Chamberlain ordered a bayonet charge on the Confederates, charging down the hill in a move that caught the Union forces off guard. It was a daring maneuver, and it succeeded in repelling the Confederate assault, saving Little Round Top and ensuring the Union position remained intact. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, Confederate attacks on Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill also met with stiff resistance. Lee's army was worn down, and while they gained some ground, they were unable to break the Union lines. By the end of Day 2, the battlefield was a bloody and chaotic mess, with no clear winner, but both sides now knew that the stakes had never been higher. The third and final day of the Battle of Gettysburg would become legendary for a single desperate charge, Pickett's Charge. Lee, frustrated by the stiff Union resistance and running low on options, decided to go all in. If he could smash through the Union center, perhaps he could win the battle and secure a victory for the South. He chose General George Pickett, a brave but unlucky officer, to lead the assault. Pickett's division, along with other Confederate brigades, would charge across an open field towards the heart of the Union line. It was a bold and dangerous move, one that would prove to be a turning point in the battle. As Pickett's men lined up and began their march across the open ground, the Union artillery and infantry poured fire into them from the high ground. The Confederate soldiers had little cover and were exposed to devastating cannon and rifle fire. The charge, which initially seemed like it might succeed, quickly turned into a slaughter. Confederate troops were mowed down by the thousands, and the survivors were forced to retreat. Pickett's charge failed. Lee's hopes for a breakthrough were dashed, and the Confederate forces were left shattered and demoralized. In the aftermath, Lee knew that he had no choice but to retreat. The battle was lost, and with it, a major opportunity for the Confederacy to shift the momentum of the war. The Battle of Gettysburg ended with the Union Army holding the field, but the cost of victory was staggering. Over 3 days, nearly 5,100 men were killed, wounded, or went missing, making it the deadliest battle of the Civil War. The Union lost around 2,300 men, while the Confederates lost about 2,800. The battle was a bloodbath, and while the Union had won, it was a victory that came at an enormous cost. For the Confederacy, Gettysburg marked the high water mark of their invasion of the North. Lee's retreat back to the South was a grim affair. With his army demoralized and exhausted, the loss at Gettysburg, coupled with the fall of Vicksburg in Mississippi, which occurred on July 4, 1863, marked a turning point in the Civil War. The Confederacy's hopes of winning through military victory began to fade, and the Union's prospects improved dramatically. For the Union, Gettysburg was a much-needed victory. It was the first significant defeat of Lee's army, and it gave the North a renewed sense of hope. However, President Lincoln knew that the war was far from over. The Union still had to contend with Lee's army, which was still capable of inflicting heavy damage. Yet, with Gettysburg behind them, the Union had the upper hand, and the Confederacy's future was in doubt. It was just a few months after the battle that Abraham Lincoln would visit the site of the battle to dedicate the Soldiers' National Cemetery. His Gettysburg address, delivered on November 19, 1863, would immortalize the battle and its meaning. In just a few brief paragraphs, Lincoln captured the essence of what Gettysburg had come to symbolize. Not just a military victory, but a rebirth of the nation, a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Lincoln's words echoed across time, helping to define the moral purpose of the war. The Civil War, it seemed, was not just a war to preserve the Union, but to achieve a new birth of freedom for all Americans. The battle at Gettysburg and the sacrifices made there would not be in vain. The Battle of Gettysburg was more than just a military engagement. It was a defining moment in the American Civil War. It marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy, as their invasion of the North was repelled. The Union, though suffering immense losses, now had the momentum. The bravery of soldiers like Joshua Chamberlain, the tragic heroism of those who fought and died on the fields of Gettysburg, and the leadership of generals like Meade and Lee ensured that the Battle of Gettysburg would be remembered as one of the most significant turning points in American history. As time passed, Gettysburg would not only be a place of reflection and remembrance, but a symbol of the sacrifices made for freedom and unity. In the end, the courage and determination displayed at Getty